right off of lap 1, literally going into turn 1, we've got like a 4-car wide kind of domino collision, essentially ending in Lando spinning out and not even completing the first turn of the race.
It was such a chaotic start to a sprint race, but as you all know, I do love a sprint race. So, but yes, crazy crash to start.
It's very tricky. And honestly, my opinion has changed since I watched all of the onboards and kind of timed them appropriately. I really don't know who to put the blame on clearly. So you've got Lewis Hamilton, who says he saw a gap, saw an opening to come in, and we'll show clips on the screen so that if you happen to miss the sprint race, you can kind of tag along with us. But he saw a gap on the inside of the corner, so he's trying to go on the inside. When you watch Fernando Alonso's onboard cam, you can see that he looks at least 2 times into his mirror and understands and sees that Hamilton's coming up from the rear on his right. At the same time, you can kind of see him start to veer left, which to his left is Lance Stroll. Now, the interesting thing to me is I thought that this 100% went domino effect. I was thinking Hamilton came in, he was late to hit the brakes, he didn't necessarily have enough room. He hit Alonso, Alonso hit Stroll, Stroll hit Lando. But when you look at all of the onboard cams and they're in sync, you can actually see that there was a collision between Alonso and Stroll before Hamilton hit Alonso, then tipping Stroll into tipping Lando and spinning him out. So it is really interesting. It almost makes me think, Alonso was aware enough to see Hamilton. I'm not saying that wasn't a risky move on Hamilton's part, but he was aware enough to see him and kind of move over. It looks like Lance was the one who didn't necessarily scooch over enough to give Alonso that room and kind of turned into Alonso. And Lando was just going wide. I mean, he had plenty of room to make that turn until Lance was really hit into him. So it's one of those things where it's like, honestly, all 3 of them, besides Lando, Lando was out there just minding his own business, but the other 3 were kind of all at fault in some way. Of course, since this was a turn 1 collision, there was no penalty or anything on Hamilton, on Fernando or Stroll. But ultimately, it did prevent Lando and Stroll from completing the sprint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought it was so wild. Definitely similar thoughts to you as well. I think it was a domino effect. That track isn't that wide to begin with. So for us to have like a 3-car and then with adding Norris, like a 4-car wide turn 1 where everybody is trying to get a position, for sure, yeah, something's gonna happen. There was not enough space on the track, and at the end of the day, it is racing, and Hamilton needed to push, Alonso was pushing, Stroll was pushing. I do think the Aston Martins were already getting a little tangled, and then you add Lewis to the mix, and then we saw it kind of unravel. With Norris kind of catching some air there off the track, and then ends up with a decent fine as well for leaving his car and walking off the track. But
yes, and for those of you who may not know what Chelsea was referring to, after the crash, after the spin out, Lando had to leave his vehicle. He DNF'd, and he chose to just kind of literally sprint across the sprint race. And he did not have the approval to do so from the marshals at the time. He was fined £50,000, which is, chump change probably, which 25,000 pounds of that will be deferred until the end of the season. but it was a fine. Obviously, you know, he claims that he understands that it was a risky thing to do, because you're not ever supposed to put your life in danger when there is a, you know, race going on. That was the big event, really. Like lap 1, turn 1 of the sprint. Sprint ended Verstappen, Leclerc, and Perez.